All right. Okay. I usually struggle with why I should do videos. But this has been an idea that has been kind of circulating my mind for a while, which is um, talking about my experience under uh, Lacanian analysis. Um, so, I guess what kind of sparked this inspiration is that I think before I ever went into Lacanian psychoanalysis, I also had run into a YouTube video about someone talking about their experience in Lacanian um, analysis, and I found their experience interesting. It wasn't enough at the moment to provoke me to go to analysis, but it was, you could say, enough to spark my curiosity. And I think I was inspired by that video, and it's a shame, I think, that there isn't enough people talking about their own analysis, or sharing their own experience about their own analysis. Because I think that's important. Um, I think people might be more interested in undergoing something like Lacanian analysis if they could hear their experience. So when I decided to go under Lacanian analysis, something I discovered is that uh, because to be honest, I just don't have any other type of experience with any other kind of therapy. Also the truth is I wasn't interested in any other kind of therapy, but psychoanalysis. So I was biased from the start. I admit you know I had read Freud years ago, and I was still occasionally reading Freud, and I would occasionally read Lacan and stuff like that. I wasn't an expert by any means, but I was not unfamiliar. Let's put it that way. Um, but let's all right. Let's talk about the experience. So I think of a quote from Adam Phillips when he says that psychoanalysis, people always talk about it as the talking cure. But Phillips likes to reimagine it as the listening cure. And I think there's some truth to that. Psychoanalysis being the listening cure. Anyways, when I first met my analyst, it was really a jarring experience. The reason why is because um, she sort of just accepted me, right? In the sense of there was no pre-meeting. There was no pre-meeting to discuss what I was looking for, what I was wanting. Um, she simply she simply appeared in front of me. She said, "Hello, hi, nice to meet you," and then um, she just looked at me. She just looked at me in silence, waiting. Uh, and I didn't know what to do. I was thinking the whole time, what is she wanting from me, right? And for those of you that have read Lacan, this type of question is a very anxious question, right? What does the other want from me? Um, but it was a real experience of like what is it that you're wanting? But also, I mean, to be fair, I was also looking at it logistically, like how do you want this session to play out? What am I supposed to do? Um, And so I did express that to her, and my analyst at the time, she said, you know, I just I just need you to free associate. What's funny about this is that I didn't ask what free associating was, um, but she did sort of clarify, just kind of say whatever comes to your mind. And, then she sort of let me ask a couple other questions, um, because at the time I think she labeled herself, well, she still labels herself as sort of an unconventional Lacanian, and I never knew exactly what that meant, and I'm still mystified as to exactly what that meant, because I don't think in the sessions I really experienced anything different. Um, but of course, how would I really know what a conventional Lacanian is supposed to behave like versus unconventional Lacanian? Um, this will be for I'm kind of fast forwarding the story, but I do have a new analyst now that I'm working with, because unfortunately my first analyst, um, she became pregnant, and she was starting to have health issues, so she had to kind of stop seeing me for a while, and she suggested that I continue my analysis. um, so anyways, so my experience was this moment of utter silence, um, and sort of attempting to speak what's on my mind. Now, I think for a lot of people, what's confusing about free association is some of you might believe that free association is um, saying almost like ridiculous things. You think you're just saying stuff like "but," "peaches," "tomatoes." Like it almost seems like you're saying like random things, right? Because you're thinking like whatever comes to mind. Well, this is what comes to mind. Um, However, that's not really how free association works. The way free association works in my mind is, in my experience, is free association seems to have a kind of pattern to it, right? You sort of begin, let's say, talking about, again, whatever first initially provokes your mind, right? So you could say something like, um, I had a fight with my girlfriend, and then you start telling the story, right? Um, and the analyst will sort of ask you a question, right? And they'll typically say something like, you know, tell me more about this frustration, right? They'll usually use the terms in the way you describe something, right? For example, like one time I described desire as a steamroller, right? As a steamrolling, right? And my analyst said, so tell me more about this steamrolling, right? She didn't say, tell me more about this desire. She told me, she asked me, tell me more about this steamrolling, right? And so this kind of guided free association um, sort of helps you connect to certain memories. Ironically, it kind of the analyst question kind of sets you up to explore or start encountering certain memories, right? For example, like, talking about your relationship could end up leading you talking about your mother. It could lead you talking about your past experiences at work or with other people. So the analyst sets up the question and sort of guides you towards possibly provoking a memory. And the further that, and the more that you go along with this process of speaking and attempting to answer the questions that the analyst wants you to answer and free associate about, you start to see um, a picture of not the way things are, but the way things are so far as you have described them to be. And I think that's probably the most interesting thing about Lacanian psychoanalysis, um, is that they sort of use your words and your phrasing against yourself. And it's an exploration of why you describe those situations as you describe them. You know, why do you describe desire as a steamroller? What is it about this specific description? Why this specific description over any other description? Um, and that's what the analyst sort of provokes you into thinking about. They provoke you into this thought by simply asking questions. You will never, rarely will you ever hear your analyst, in my experience, tell you what to do and what to think. Now, this is what's different from other types of therapy, um, is that generally the therapist tries to give you suggestions and um, advice about what to do. Um, but in Lacanian analysis, there is really rarely um, ever that situation. And so when I first entered into analysis, the reasons for my entering was that I found myself very angry. Um, you could say something like my complexes were no longer working for me. My symptoms were no longer um, making life go by. They're making life, in fact, very miserable. And my father had also recently died during the time. Actually, I think it had been within a year that had of my father's death that I had decided to go to analysis. Um, so yeah, so I was very angry, and I think what I can say now is being able to have multiple conversations with my analyst about my frustrations, about my past, about the way I describe things, sort of helped me understand. And again, this isn't something that they tell me I'm correct or incorrect in understanding, but it is something um, that I myself have begun to realize, which is, you could say, my anger was a sign of all the things I was unable to say, and yet at the same time, a sign of things that I wanted to say, but I was embarrassed to say. Actually, that was some of the things that came up in one of my analysis, which was that I shared being embarrassed when I was angry. And what's interesting about this was that I really thought that people generally get embarrassed when they get angry. I generally thought that. I generally thought that there was something deeply embarrassing about anger. But it wasn't until my analyst said something like, "Have you always been embarrassed when you were angry?" And I thought that was such a very good question because I never thought about the time element in terms of, have I always been this way? And that sort of forced me to try to recollect a moment when I wasn't. And surprisingly enough, I was able to recollect moments when I wasn't embarrassed to be angry. But at the same time, that afforded me the possibility to remember when I first began to start to feel embarrassed when I was angry. Um, so I think that's what's important with this sort of series of guided questions paired with free association. Um, and I think that's why it afforded me a different view of, my being angry. Instead, now I look at anger as, you could say, an incomplete sentence, right? Um, a desire that something wants to be spoken. Um, and only in this desire of something to be spoken can something be revealed. And I think my embarrassment about anger was that I was afraid of the revelation that anger could give you, right? Even if it's a misunderstanding. And I think that's the thing that I feared most initially. I feared most initially misunderstanding. I was deeply afraid of misunderstanding, and that's why I looked at anger as a embarrassment, because I found most of the time anger was not simply justified, but also simply a misunderstanding, a deep misunderstanding. In fact, it seems to be the case that the only way to protect my justification for anger was to refuse communicating it. Um, but in my experience, most of the time, anger is a misunderstanding about something. It's a perceived injustice. Um, but I hope that helps elucidate. I mean, it doesn't quite tell everything, but I think the point of Lacanian psychoanalysis is that you find a space in which you're able to finally say something that might surprise you. And you also find a space in which you can say something that the analyst is not going to judge you on. Because there's nothing that you can really gather from the analyst that proves you're going in the right direction. If anything, most of the time you encounter a kind of silence. Um, I sort of grown accustomed to the silence after a while. I know that eventually they have to ask me a question if I stop speaking. Um, but I think a lot of the point is that you should keep going on talking as long as you can, as much as you can, um, freely, um, and sort of have faith in the process that whatever the question the analyst gives you is sort of a guidepost towards your own self surprise about the way that you describe things, about the way that you think things really are. Now, I think what's also interesting is that when it comes to this question of healing, um, I was very convinced that I could be healed from, by psychoanalysis. But I think this question of healing, let's put it this way. I'm surprised by the fact I'm not really interested in healing. Whereas when I first entered analysis, I was deeply interested in getting rid of my symptoms. And there was a period where I did encounter the vanishing of my symptoms. But the vanishing of my symptoms eventually came back. And my analyst said to me, um, she sort of just laughed and said, it's much more difficult to get rid of symptoms, huh? You know, and yeah, but also, I also realized that when you have been wanting to get rid of something for so long, like a specific symptom, you'll be surprised that it also serves as a kind of enjoyment for you um, once it leaves you. For example, and I think this is a good example to give this. Um, One of my symptoms is that I pick my facial hair. Like I constantly pick it. I'm like a bird pulling out its feathers, right? And I hate this because I get ingrown hairs and my girlfriend has to pick it, right, for me. Um, but here's the thing: when my symptom was gone, one of them, right, specifically the picking of the hairs, um, I was thrilled. I was happy that my symptom was gone. I felt like I was being cured from something. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that was very surprising was that I started missing my symptom because I didn't know what it previously stood for or what it could stand for. And what I missed about my symptom was all the moments that my girlfriend would lay next to me and try to take out an ingrown hair. I didn't realize that that was a moment of affection that I would really enjoy and really miss. So I think that's what's interesting about symptoms is that you think that you would be thrilled when they're gone. And I was. But also, you'd be surprised how there's a kind of hidden enjoyment in there. And it's hard to realize what that enjoyment is until it's gone. Um, and you could say I was lucky that it came back. Um, you could say at a certain point I wanted it to come back because I deeply miss this moment of affection. Um, so again, this question of healing, um, I sort of dropped this desire to, quote, heal. Um, I look at my time now as an analysand, as talking to my analyst, as someone who deeply enjoys speaking, um, deeply enjoys conversation. And I know that seems odd because really most of the time the analyst is listening. But I think that's also the beautiful part about conversation is that you get to encounter a conversation where listening is really happening. And it's not listening in the sense of what's being said, because that's how we like to associate listening as, did you listen to what I said? Rather, it's a kind of listening to what is not being said. And that I think I find more enjoyable. That I think is a more enjoyable kind of conversation with someone. That they're listening to something that I'm not saying, that I'm somehow refusing to say. Um, so you could say I'm not really interested in healing anymore. Not the way I initially began my journey in analysis. I sort of now I look at it like I'm very excited to just talk to my analyst. I'm very excited to um, have a conversation with a friend. Of course, it's not exactly like a friend because you have to pay them, and there's this sort of transactional experience, right? And you don't really know much, if anything, about your, you know, analyst. But there are these moments where you find yourself both laughing about what you said. Um, and I think that's also analogous to being having a kind of friendship. Um, so you could say this. I'm probably going to continue analysis until I see fit, until I see no point of doing it. As of right now, it's hard for me to imagine otherwise. But I guess you can say I'm not really interested in an end date to my analysis, which is often the rebuttal to why should somebody go into analysis. Um, if you look at it monetarily, yes, you could say it's a money suck. Um, but I feel like it's quite priceless in terms of the fact that I'm able to look at my life completely differently. Um, so yeah. Anyways, I hope this helps. I don't know um, what else to say more about my experience in Lacanian analysis, but I can only hope that maybe this provokes you to be curious about it and to try it out. And I think that's all I can suggest is to simply try it out. If it's not your cup of tea, then it's not your cup of tea. But all I have is my own experience and my own testimony to the fact that it seems to help me. And I seem to have also dropped the idea of being helped and being cured. um, yeah. But anyways, all right. Take care.